Hi, Brian Marks from Notman Marks Financial Training, and getting a lot of questions on the Series 79 for helping to make a distinction between the proxy and a prospectus. And a lot of candidates get these confused, mainly because they sound similar. They both start with the letters PRO. So let's talk about when you would see each of these documents. So a prospectus in general, with one exception I'll get to in a few minutes, is required anytime there is a registered securities offering. A proxy is required anytime there is a shareholder vote. And a shareholder vote would really occur in two circumstances. The first being at your annual meeting, the second being a merger vote. So let's start with registering securities. This would only a prospectus, not a proxy. Only a prospectus, not a proxy. So when registering securities, on, for example, an S1, the S1 is filed with the SEC. And then, this is really referring to an IPO, becomes a red herring, that is used to market the deal during the cooling off period. And by the way, the two documents are the same, except for its different cover page. So the S1 is the same as the red, and then becomes the final prospectus, also known as a 424B, when the deal is effective. So again, people always ask, Brian, what's the difference between an S1 versus a red herring versus a final prospectus? Same content, different timing, and the prospectus has all details, whereas the S1 and red herring usually omit timely details. Such as the final offer price and number of shares. Okay, so the documents are the same, different cover pages. Only omit those timely details of the transaction. Okay, so that's kind of our critical differences there. Now, a proxy. So let's talk about your annual meeting. Okay, your annual meeting will have only a proxy. So you have the general proxy form is basically a 14A. So you have a preliminary proxy and a definitive proxy. A preliminary proxy is not required for most annual meetings. As long as you're voting on only run-of-the-mill normal annual meeting stuff, you will not have a preliminary proxy. Okay. A definitive proxy is always required. And the timing, if there is a preliminary, the preliminary proxy is filed with the SEC at least 10 days prior to the definitive proxy, definitive 14A, and the definitive proxy is filed with the SEC and sent to shareholders at least 20 days prior to the meeting. And I'm not going to go through all the contents in the proxy. That's not the point of this review. The point of this review is to make a distinction between when there is a proxy and when there is a prospectus. All right, so then there is, when will you have a situation when you have both a prospectus and a proxy? When could there be both a prospectus and a proxy? Well, the answer is during a merger. So is there always a proxy in a merger? No. The answer is no, there's not. A proxy will exist anytime shareholders are voting on the deal. And that's going to happen either, this will happen either if the selling shareholders are closing via a one-step merger, because a two-step is a tender, so you're not going to have a vote. In a two-step merger, selling shareholders don't actually vote, they just decide if they want to sell their shares or not, so there's no actual vote. Or if the purchasing shareholders get to vote because the deal is increasing the number of outstanding shares by 20% or more. So let me just, these two circumstances, the selling shareholders are closing via one step, or if the purchasing shareholders get to vote because the deal is increasing the number of outstanding shares by 20%. So in that case, if there is, so those two cases, you'll have a proxy. And they're merger proxies, so you have an M in there. So pre-M14A versus a def M14A. Same timelines as annual proxies, which is the 10 days and the 20 days outlined above. So that's when you have a proxy in a merger. Now here's where things get a little tricky. We talked a second ago, a prospectus is anytime you're registering securities. That we talked about. There is also, though, the SEC has decided that in the context of a merger, they have a crazy use of the term prospectus. And during an M&A deal, not a pre-writing prospectus, that doesn't exist in an M&A deal, but during an M&A deal, the SEC says that any communications between signing and closing, any communications with shareholders between signing and closing are defined as a prospectus and must be filed with the SEC no later than the date of first use. Must be filed with the SEC no later than the date of first use. It's not 24 hours before first use. It's not 48 hours before first use. It's no later than the date of first use. So you have the signing of the deal, signing of the definitive agreement, until the closing. And anything in this period right here, anything right there in that period of time is considered a prospectus and must be filed. So e.g., what's an example of that? A press release announcing the deal. Deal details on the company's website. An airline merger with information in the seat pocket. By the way, here's what can be really confusing. The proxy, that's a communication with the public. The def M14A on the def M14A, because that goes to investors, that is actually considered a prospectus because it's a communication to shareholders. Now, the reality is because it's got to be filed 20 days before, the date of first use thing is superseded in the proxy. But for all of these must be filed with the SEC no later than the date investors receive it or can see it. So the day it goes on the website, the day you publish a press release, the day you put the airline merger information in the seat pocket, the day you send the proxy to investors, which is at least 20 days before the meeting. So in an M&A deal, that's when you have both. So you have a proxy anytime there's a vote, and you have a prospectus that relates to any communications with the public between signing and closing of the transaction. So it's probably worth it to watch this a second time if you're still struggling. This is a topic that a lot of candidates have questions about, and it can be a bit confusing, so we hope you found this helpful. Thanks very much.